Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Vanessa Lesniak. For those of you who are new around here, welcome, and for those who are coming back, welcome back. So last week I posted a video on the art of intuitive painting, and one of the questions that I got the most of was, what does that process look like to you? How do you actually sit down and do it? So today I'm going to show you what that looks like. So you may not know this, but the majority of the pieces that I post here on my YouTube channel are all done intuitively. I usually sit down on Mondays and I paint and I record what I paint. And I don't go into it knowing exactly what I'm going to paint. That comes in during the process. The only time that does not happen is when I am painting very specific step-by-step pieces, such as the watercolor bubbles or the watercolor raindrops. Those were very, very specific, and I needed to know what I was doing before I actually tackled the piece. For this one, and for the majority, I don't. So first thing I do is, obviously I have all my tools around me, and I had two decisions that I made. The only two decisions I made early on was that, one, I wanted to color, or I wanted to paint on white paper, and two, I wanted to use this specific palette, which I call my Galaxy palette. And you will see this specific palette in a lot of my paintings, because these are the colors that I like to work with the most. So when I'm going into intuitive painting, I set the mood by either putting on some music or putting on a podcast. Today, I was feeling a little bit down this morning for, reasons. So I decided to listen to my absolute favorite book, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. So The House in the Cerulean Sea is just this really magical, feel-good book, and it feels just like a warm hug. And I always turn to this book when I need a little bit of a pick-me-up. So I'm listening to this book and I'm painting. So the first thing I always do is I put water on the paper. And the reason I do that is so that I can look at the paints flow into each other. That will definitely put me into that mindset of letting go as I am painting, and just watching the colors flow and the colors blend. It really helps to disconnect from my environment and the realities, of life. Not to get too deep, but that's what I do. After I put down water on my paper, I pick a couple of colors, and I don't pick them beforehand. I just kind of pick them as I go. And you'll see here that there is no real structure to where I'm putting the colors down. My first layer usually is just putting color on paper. It doesn't matter where that color is, because usually by the end, it's going to be covered up anyway. And that's what I like to do. I like to work in different layers. So all of my layers I work in are wet. They're all wet on wet layers. I start with water, I add paint, then I add another layer of paint, then I add another layer of paint until I'm satisfied with what I have. You will also see that I also don't really pay any mind to what color I put on top of another color. So I will put green on top of blue, purple on top of blue, blue on top of green. I will just keep adding the colors. And usually what happens is, by the end, by the third or fourth layer, all of the colors just kind of merge and blend in together, and it's very seamless. So you don't know where one starts and the other one ends. And that's what I really love about this process. So by this point in my painting, I still don't really know what the outcome is going to be. I usually have a little bit of an idea, and just by looking at the colors that I have added to the paper, I know, okay, this actually may turn into a galaxy. It may turn into something else, depending on what it looks like. It may turn into a night sky with a couple of, colors peeking through. It can turn into almost anything. I can make it into an abstract piece. But honestly, at this point, I'm not thinking about any of that. But I have that little voice in the back of my head saying, oh, this could turn into a little bit, something more than what it is. But usually that process doesn't come, or that thinking doesn't really come to the forefront until I'm done with my layers. And right now, all I'm doing is playing. I am not even really paying attention too much to what I'm doing on the paper. I'm listening to my lovely audiobook with a little smile on my face at times. And I'm just letting go. And intuitive painting really is about letting go of the expectations you have of yourself, of your painting, of your creativity, and just doing it, just painting. Getting rid of any preconceived notions you have of how good you should be, what your pieces should look like at the end, and yeah, just let go of all of that and just paint. And it's sort of like when you were younger, right? When you were a kid and you had that joy about you for new things. When you were painting or finger painting, you didn't know what you were doing. Most times, me personally, even when I was painting as a child, and when I'm talking about child, I'm talking about child, like, when you're first starting to use your senses and being tactile, and you don't know what you're doing, but you're doing it just for the fun of it. And that's the feeling that you want to capture here. So when I look at my 6-year-old, and right now she is beginning to paint purposefully, but she still has those times where all she wants to do is just splatter the paper with paint. And that's kind of the feeling that you're evoking when you are working in this style. So at this point, you see that I start making strokes in my paper, these not horizontal, these diagonal strokes. And this kind of came about naturally because I looked at my piece and I was like, oh, I have this really big swath of blue, like right down the middle. And it looks like almost everything I painted kind of looks vertical, or not vertical, diagonal. Everything I painted looks kind of diagonal. So I just went with it. I was like, oh yeah, this looks kind of cool. Everything is looking a little bit diagonal. So I'm going to make it a little bit more purposeful. So I'm going to add some darker strokes, some darker blue, and I'm going to put it diagonally. So this is like, I haven't been paying attention, like my second or third layer of paint. And now I kind of get the sense that, I think I want to make this into like a galaxy sky. Not necessarily a galaxy, it could be like a night sky. But I wanted to make it look like there's some movement in it because all of these diagonal lines gave the piece a little movement. So I'm mixing in a little Payne's gray into my blue, and I am making it a little bit darker so that I can add these lines mostly around the edges, but also bringing some of them in because I want it to look like my piece has a little bit of movement. So when you're looking up at the night sky and you see like all the stars and everything, and you feel like there's sort of like a movement to the sky. And that's kind of the feeling that I wanted to evoke in this piece, just the feeling of movement. And again, when I first started this, I had no clue that that's what I wanted to do. But it ended up that way because of the way that the paint was spreading on the paper and the way that the paint was moving and the way it looked when I got done with those layers. It all looked like it was going on a diagonal, so I went with it. So all I'm doing now is just adding a little bit of depth to the piece by adding in that Payne's gray, adding in that blue, and putting more diagonal lines in it. At this point, I feel like I have the background where I want it. So I get up and I take a little bit of a coffee break. I go and I grab some coffee, and then I came back to it. I let the piece dry completely. And as I was sipping my coffee, I looked at my painting and I was like, oh, you know what? This looks like it really could be like the sky, right? The sky at night with a bit of color coming through. So maybe just after sunset. And I decided, maybe a nice little mountain range at the bottom would look nice against the sky. And I went with it, right? So when I say I went with it, I just went with it. Just take the very tip of my brush and then just started drawing in some lines. There is no pre-planning to this. I have no idea how these mountains are going to turn out, but I wanted to cover up as much of the bottom as I possibly can. So I start with the lines of the mountains, the outline, and now I'm just going in and I am adding some extra paint to the top and then dragging that paint down with water. Again, this process is just very soothing and very relaxing, just to let the paint flow. And you'll see that a lot of times when I am painting, even if you have seen previous videos of mine, I really am a fan of letting the paint do what the paint wants to do. It's very conducive to intuitive painting. Just kind of going with the flow, no pun intended, and let the paint do what it wants to do. So I add some paint to the top of the mountains, and then I just add water to the bottom edge and let it flow. And just watching this process is also so relaxing, and it's the perfect way to start a Monday morning. So I'm just gonna pipe in real quick and tell you that I painted this morning. Today is Monday, March 21st, the same day that I'm posting this video. And I didn't go in, obviously, with knowing exactly what I wanted to paint, because I wanted this process to come as natural as they usually do. Now, usually around this time in my piece, I know exactly where this is going. So it does become a little bit more intentional, but it still keeps me in that space of kind of like letting go. Even though I know now what I want to do, I still don't know what it's going to look like at the end. I know that I wanted to have mountains, a beautiful sky, maybe some stars, maybe a comet or two. But that is it. What that is going to look like is yet to be determined. So now I'm just kind of working on the mountains. Over the Payne's gray, I'm adding in some of the colors that I added in for the sky. And you're not going to be able to see it too well now, but you will see it once I start scrubbing out some of that paint. So I'm adding in a little bit of green, I'm adding in a little bit of blue, I'm adding in a little bit of purple, and that helps to have to bring in some of that reflection from the colors in the sky into the mountains. I am also adding in a bit more Payne's gray so that the mountains could have some contrast, so it doesn't look like just a colorful blob at the bottom of the piece. So we're going to carve in some light, but for now we're just adding in some of that shadow. We definitely want to have a bit of darkness to the mountains so that when we scrub out the light for the mountains, it'll be more pronounced. So again, there is really no like rhyme or reason to where I'm putting this down. Right now I am just letting the paint flow. I am going from the top of the mountain straight to the bottom, and I am just letting it flow. And now, while my mountain is still wet, I am going to scrub out some of that paint. So I am taking my brush and I am cleaning it off and drying it on a paper towel. And I am running it along parts of the mountain to bring in some of the lightness from the colors that we initially put down. So a lot of the background is going to show through, but it's not going to look as if the mountains are see-through because we're being sort of strategic about where we're placing it. If you see here, what I'm doing is I'm adding light to the left parts of the mountain, and just if you can just keep them all on one side of the mountain, it will be a little bit more effective at showing the texture and the depth and dimensions of that mountain. So all I'm doing is just scrubbing out a little bit of paint with a fairly dry brush. So you see I'm cleaning it, I'm drying it on a paper towel, and I am scrubbing out some of that color. And I'm doing it very lightly because I don't want to scrub too much color out. I want some of the color from underneath to show. And again, I'm just doing that here and there. I'm still listening to my book, and I am still kind of in that space of, not really paying too much attention to what's going on, just kind of going with the flow. Now I decided I'm going to add a couple of stars, so I'm blocking off my mountain with this piece of scrap paper that I had next to me. I'm dipping into some white, and again, I will list all of my supplies down below, and I'm just tapping it in. Just tap, 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 tap. Again, this is one of those other things that I love to do, listening to the sounds of the brush hit the other brush and the paint splattering on the paper. If you get some on your mountains, that's okay. Go with it. It could be like further reflections. Again, there is no right or wrong way to do it. If you want to tap it with your finger, if you want to use a toothbrush, feel free to do any of it. And yeah, we're just adding in some stars. Add as few or as many as you'd like. I decided that I wanted my sky to be full of stars. And I'm also adding in some bigger ones. So with the very tip of my brush, I'm going in and I am adding in some thicker stars. And usually the ending of the piece is my favorite part, because that's where I get completely lost in adding details. Now, I didn't do that to this piece. I didn't add a ton of details. I just added a couple of little strokes to show a comment. But usually I go all out. I grab my watercolor shimmers, my metallic paints, and I add stars and circles, and I go crazy with details because to me, that is just like the perfect way to finish a session of intuitive painting. So I hope that you found this helpful. If you have any other questions regarding the process or anything else, feel free to ask me below. I am more than happy to make videos that will help you further understand and get into the art of intuitive painting and the art of letting go. I'll see you next time.